Hello everyone, this is JBJ and I'll be talking about UITableViews and how you can work with them. Now before we get started, I will be assuming that you know Xcode, Objective-C and basic app development. You've made some basic apps, you know, buttons, views, view controllers, etc. Now when should you use a UITableView? Well, basically it's to display data. Like the example there, we have 3 what we call cells with different kinds of data. Now the best way to illustrate this is just to jump right in. So let's start up a new Xcode project. We're gonna make it a single view application and we're gonna call it TableViews, and we're just gonna make it an iPhone specific application, but it's basically the same when you're developing for iPad. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is create our interface. So we're going to go into storyboard. There we go. And we are going to look for the navigation bar. There it was. And then we need a table view. Should be let's see, there we go, table view. We drag this in to fit nicely right there. Then we drag in a table view cell, and I'm going to show you why we do this in just a sec. Right now we're just making our our interface, and the navigation bar we're just gonna call table view like this, and then we need a single item, a bar button item, which we will name add item. And what we want is that every time we press add item, we create an object and its data should be displayed in the table view cell. Alright, so the first thing we need is some kind of data to display. This can be anything. It can be strings, numbers, images. It can be a lot of things. And in this case, we are going to be creating a custom object, Objective-C class. We're just going to name it item, and it's a subclass within this object, like this. Now we want our item to have a property, non-atomic copy, and we want it in a string. We'll call it name because our item has a name, and we also want a let's take an integer value and we'll name it price. So our item has a name and a price, and that's the two things we want to display in our table view. So let's just quickly make a custom initialization method, init with name, taking in a string as an argument, and price int p. Whoops, there we go. And we'll just quickly create this, and you should be familiar with how to make custom initialization methods. Do like this, and we are gonna set our instance variables self set name to the passed in arguments, and we do the same thing with our price value like this, and of course we override the custom or the inherited initialization method to use our designated initializer and call it default with a price of 0. There, and that's basically our little class. Now we want to display this data in our table view, and a table view consists of these cells that are dragged in here. This is a TableView cell, and this is an object that will be used to represent the data, and each cell will represent each item. So one cell object for an item object. And if we go into the the different properties of a UITableView cell, you can see it has a style. Take the basic, you see a title, or the right detail, left detail, subtitle, and for our application, this would actually be a good starting point, because the title could be the name and the detail could be the price, and that would actually suit this application. So we're going to go ahead and use this style. And what's very important to make is a reuse identifier, and what this does is that it allows us to use this prototype cell that we created here as the starting point for each other cell we make. So we are gonna name this table cell. It's just a basic string, so you can name this anything. Okay, and I think we should be good to go now. So now we go into our view controller, and in order to work with the UITableView, we need to conform to two protocols. We need to conform to the UITableView data source and the UITableView delegate. Now, the data source is responsible for loading in data to our table view, and the delegate is to let us know when a user selects a specific item or wants to delete something in the table view. So before we get started, we are just going to log into the data source protocol reference, scroll down and see there is two required methods, and the first one is the TableView cell for row at index path, and it's a required method, so obviously we need to include it. Now, this method is actually the one where we create the cell, because you can see it returns a UITableView cell object. So in this method, we are going to load in our prototype cell, we are going to fill it up with the data from our items objects, and then we're going to return it so the table view can display it. And the other method we needed was called the number of rows in section, and it returns an NS integer value. Now what this does is telling our our table view how many table view cells it has, how many item objects do we have. So this is a number, and obviously we could just say return 10, and then we would have 10 cells to create, but this isn't really a good solution, because what if we added 11 items or 5 items? Then it wouldn't fit. So what we need is actually to make an array, and then a mutable array, and we will call it all items. This array will hold all our items objects, and what this enables us to do is return the count value of all items in this method. So we can say return all items count. So now when we add an item, we add it to the all items array, we return the count value, and that is how many cells we want. So that's all great, but we kind of need a way to create the items, and that's why we add this funny little button here. So let's create an action for this. Go into the assistant editor, control drag, and make an action. We call it create item. This, and we will implement it Just gonna drag it up. There we go. And we want to create an item, and we're just gonna make it a default item. First we need to pause our item class, obviously, and then we create an item using our designated initializer. We will call it iPhone with a price of 50. It's a very cheap iPhone. And what we're going to do then is to add it to our all items array. And that's actually how we're going to create our items. And what's very important to do is actually to make our items array, because if we don't create it, we can't really use it and it would mess up the program. So now we should be good to go. When the view loads, we create an array. Whenever you touch the add item button, we create a custom item and we add it to the array. When the table view asks its data source, which is this one, it will return the number of items we hold in the all items array. So that's all great. But let's just first specify that this table view actually uses this view controller as its data source and delegate, because you could use other objects to handle this, but the most common practice is to use the view controller. So we're going to control drag on the table view down to the view controller and press the data source, and we will do the same thing about the delegate, like that. So now we've specified that the data source and delegate is the view controller. Now let's just create an outlet as well for our table view, because it's nice to have a way to talk to our table view programmatically if we need to. Alright, so now we need to create our cells. Now if you read up on this method, it will tell you that you create the cell object that is marked for reuse by sending the DQ reusable cell with identifier message to the table view. Okay, so if we examine this method, we see that we need to return a UITableView cell. So obviously we need to create a UITableView cell. We call it cell, and as the method specified, we need to ask the table view, which we get a pointer to right here, table view, and call this method DQ reusable cell with identifier. And the identifier is actually what we made in the storyboard here in our prototype cell. We call it table cell, and make sure this is spelled exactly as it is in the storyboard. And there we go. What this does is that it creates a table view cell with this style, these colors, and the size. You can also specify size here. So what we need to do now is to set the properties of our cell, the title, and the detail. Alright, so we go in here. We take the cell and we call its text label. It's a UI label, and that's the title. We say set text, and we will set that text to the item's text property. But we don't know which item this is. We need some way to figure out which kind of item we're talking about, because we can't just ask the array to give us a random item. So how exactly do we do this? Well, this is where the NS index path comes in the picture, because an index path has something called a row property, and the row property specifies which type of cell we are creating, and it's being ranged exactly like the index of the array class. So what we can do is create an item like this, and we are going to ask all items for an object at index at the index path dot row. If we do this, and it's the first time we are creating a TableView cell, the index path dot row will be 0, which also happens to be the object at index 0, which is the first object in our mutable array. And the next time the TableView is going to be making a cell, the index path dot row property will be 1, which happens to be the second object in the all items array, and thus it keeps on going. The index path dot row increments for each cell it makes. So this line of code is very common to use when you are loading in TableView data. It should be mentioned that the index path also has a second property. Quickly go in here. You can see here, you can get it at positions by adding index, removing length index. You can get a length. So the index path is also an object, and thus you can also work with this class, but it's beyond the scope of this tutorial. This is the important part. Excuse me. So now we got the proper item. We know that this item is the item we want to display, and thus when we set the text, we can simply use the item's name string like this. And we also need to set the detail text label, and we do this by creating an inner string, because the detail text label set text takes an inner string as an argument. So inner string, string with format, and since it's an integer, we'll display it's this, and item price. There. Now we have actually customized our cell to display the item name and the item price. So now we just want to return the cell, and we're done. That's actually how you create a table view. And if we take this for a spin, we should be able to add items. Obviously, we can only add iPhones with a price of $50, but you can customize the create item method to enable the user to specify his own details. Let's just see if it loads up. Any minute, and there we go. You can see here's our table view, and it's very empty. So let's try and add an item. Whoops, nothing happens. Well, how come nothing happens here? Because we've actually done everything right. But remember that we added an outlet, and the reason why we added an outlet is to be able to do this. Table view reload data. The reload data method asks our table view to call these methods again so that it can load up its data, because the first time we see a table view, it will call these methods. But since we don't have created any items, this will return 0, and thus we won't create any cells. When we create a new object, yeah, sure, we create a new object, but we never tell the table view to start updating again. But when we do this, the table view will reload its data. And the reason that I pointed it out like this is because this is a pitfall for many. And they can't understand why the table view isn't displaying their data. And a lot of the times it's because they simply forget to call the reload data whenever they come up with new data. And you see now it works. We can add all the iPhones that we want, scroll through them, it works like a charm. We can select them, but nothing happens. What if we wanted to be notified when the user selects an iPhone? Well, luckily for us, that's exactly where the delegate comes in. So let's take a look at the delegate. by option clicking and going into the Delegate protocol reference. You see there's all these kinds of methods to reorder, tracking the removal, editing, managing selections. There's a lot of stuff you can do with the table view. So obviously I can't go into detail with every single one. But the last thing I'm going to do is to show you when the user selected a specific item in the table view. And that's under the managing selections. There's something called will select, did select, will deselect, and did deselect. Now, the will select row at index path enables you to specify whether the selected item is available for selection. And it's like a preliminary report to you that something is going to be selected, so you can do some stuff before it gets selected. But the only thing we're interested in is the did select item row at index path, because this lets us know when the user selected something. So we are going to implement this method. You can see it doesn't return anything, so this method just allows us to do some work at the item that was selected. So you can see we get a pointer to the table view and we get an NS index path. So since we get an NS index path, we can do exactly like we did below. We can get the all items object at index path.row, and then we will have the item that was selected. And we could change the name property, or we could change the price, or we could launch a seek that would take us to a new view controller to edit the item. I mean, the possibilities are endless, but this is how you get a pointer to the item. But all we are going to do to conclude this tutorial is simply let us know that I selected something, so you can see that this method actually works. Take it for a spin, add some items. You can see I selected something. Every time we press an item, it will be displayed in our log. And that's how you manage the selections. So whenever a user selects something, you use this method to handle it. Now, you can also enable editing in your table views, and what the editing is the little the red removal bar you sometimes see in table views, and it lets you delete your different cells. But I think we need to conclude this tutorial. But if you want to know anything about the deletion and removal or reordering of table views, you are welcome to contact me on my beginners programming forum, and I will answer you personally. I use that forum more than YouTube, so if you could comment in there instead of here, it would be great, and the link is in the description. But as a little hint, I can say that it has something to do with the delegates. So if you look through the methods in the protocol reference, I'm sure you can figure out how to delete and reorder. And I think that actually concludes this TableView tutorial. I hope you learned something, and I hope you can use this in your future applications. And again, if you have any questions or video requests or comments, anything, please just throw them in on my programming forum and I will answer personally. And thank you all for watching, and see you guys next time.